Welcome to the debate. Today, we are taking a long, hard look at the structural integrity of the Denver Broncos 2026 roster under head coach Sean Payton. But real quick, before we dive in, you are tuning in to NFL Nexus. If you enjoy our breakdowns, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment down below with what you thought of today's show.
Yeah, and definitely consider becoming a channel member. You get exclusive content, some really cool perks, and all you have to do is click that join button right below the video.
Exactly. So let's get into it. We are examining a very specific philosophical question about modern NFL team building. Does the blockbuster acquisition of an elite field-tilting receiver like Jaylen Waddle successfully elevate a roster through offensive geometry?
Right. Or does relying on sheer continuity everywhere else basically obscure some fatal, highly exploitable flaws in the defensive side of the ball?
Which is the core issue, and we're grounding our analysis today in recent evaluations from NFL media, specifically Chad Jensen's defense of the team's overarching continuity, Travis Wakeman's critique of their lingering vulnerabilities in the middle of the field, and, Bo Nix's own observations from off-season workouts.
It really is the classic roster construction conundrum.
It is.
Because you have limited resources under the salary cap. So, do you invest everything into raising the absolute ceiling of your team with flashy perimeter talent? Or do you dedicate those assets to reinforcing the floor so the entire structure doesn't just cave in when the pressure mounts?
Right. Well, my position is that the Broncos' strategy heading into this 2026 season, returning nearly their entire starting lineup while injecting a singular elite weapon into the mix, is actually a masterclass in strategic roster construction.
A masterclass, wow.
Yes, a masterclass. It completely justifies the B-plus off-season grades analysts have been handing out. They are raising the entire operational ceiling of the offense without detonating the foundation of a team that finally found some stability.
Well, I look at the exact same offseason and see a very different reality. A splashy offensive acquisition, no matter how objectively talented the player is, often serves as a glittering distraction from glaring, unaddressed weaknesses.
You think Waddle is just a distraction?
I think when you look closely at the spine of this roster, specifically at inside linebacker and tight end, you see a team that is fundamentally fragile, relying on perimeter star power while ignoring structural decay at the second level of your defense. That is just a recipe for total collapse against elite, disciplined competition.
I understand the anxiety about the middle of the roster, but I think we have to properly weight the sheer magnitude of what Jaylen Waddle brings to an offense before we start, diagnosing the flaws. Let's look at the offensive side of this equation first.
Okay, let's look at it.
The Broncos deserve immense credit for understanding the value of stability. They are returning Bo Nix for another year in Sean Payton's system. And critically, they are returning the entire starting offensive line.
Which is great for Nix, sure.
It's a massive advantage for a young quarterback's processing speed. That kind of continuity is incredibly rare. And then, and this is the kicker, you drop a blockbuster talent like Waddle into a receiver room that already features Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Pat Bryant.
Right, it's a fast room.
It's not just about being fast. You are not just adding a guy who can run a go route. You are fundamentally changing the math for opposing defensive coordinators.
Look, the speed is undeniable. I will give you that. But speed alone doesn't rewrite an offensive playbook if the opposing defense knows you can't punish them underneath.
But the speed actually creates the underneath punishment. Let's look at what Bo Nix actually said after OTAs on June 17th. He noted that Waddle is extremely fast with the ball in his hands, but crucially, Nix pointed out that Waddle doesn't really slow down to make cuts.
Yeah, the biomechanics of that are wild.
Exactly. Do you realize how rare that is? Most receivers have to drop their hips and decelerate to change direction. Waddle maintains top-end velocity through his breaks. So I want to introduce a concept here. Offensive gravity.
Offensive gravity. Okay, lay it on me.
Because Waddle doesn't decelerate into his breaks, cornerbacks have to respect his vertical release with a massive 8 to 10-yard cushion. Safeties have to declare their deep zone rotations a half second earlier just to prevent a catastrophic breakdown over the top.
Right, they have to bail out.
And his pure speed inherently pulls defensive attention away from Courtland Sutton on the boundary and opens up those underneath zones for Marvin Mims and Pat Bryant. As Nick said, Waddle adds an element of relief for everybody else. He makes the entire offensive ecosystem hyper-efficient.
That's a great theoretical breakdown of offensive gravity. It really is. But let's look at the historical context of that exact ecosystem. Because Dolphins fans watched that exact same offensive gravity for 4 years in Miami.
And they had one of the most explosive offenses in the league.
When he was on the field, the biomechanics you're praising are incredible, but they also place immense stress on the human body. And what did we watch in Miami? We watched soft tissue injuries repeatedly disrupt his seasons.
That's a bit of an exaggeration.
Is it? Waddle is undoubtedly one of the most productive receivers in the league when fully healthy. But relying on a single, historically injury-prone player to act as the gravitational center of your entire offense is an incredibly fragile strategy. If his hamstring tweaks in week 3, does the whole solar system collapse?
You can play the injury hypothetical with literally any star player in the league. You can't construct a roster operating under the assumption that your premium acquisitions will tear a hamstring.
You have to factor it in, though.
The point is the strategic architecture. When he is on the field, the geometry inherently favors Denver. If defenses roll into a too-high safety shell, say a quarters coverage, just to put a lid on Waddle, they are mathematically lightening the box.
Right.
That gives the Broncos a numerical advantage in the run game, which protects Bo Nix and controls the clock.
I'd actually push back on the idea that the geometry automatically favors them, because the geometry is incomplete. You're talking about perimeter speed and deep safeties bailing out.
Yeah, stretching the field.
But what happens when those safeties bail out to respect Waddle's gravity? The middle of the field naturally opens up. The linebackers have to drop deeper to carry crossers. And how do you exploit the middle of the field in a Sean Payton offense?
With smart route running.
Historically, you do it with a dynamic tight end. Think about what Payton did with Jimmy Graham in New Orleans. But these 2026 Broncos have glaring youth and a severe lack of depth at that position. A perimeter speedster does not solve the need for reliable, chain-moving production on 3rd and 6 in the middle of the field.
They have Greg Dulcich, who has shown tremendous upside when healthy.
When healthy, being the operative phrase there, which brings us right back to the fragility of this roster. This is exactly why analysts like Travis Wakeman are screaming for Denver to bring in a veteran like Jonnu Smith, Darren Waller, or even a reunion with a Taysom Hill.
They don't have the cap space for a luxury signing like that right now.
But if you don't have the piece to attack the physical space that Waddle's gravity creates, the gravity doesn't translate to sustained drives. You're just running track meets on the sideline. If nobody is running a Texas route or a sit route into that vacated space to move the chains, your offense stalls.
I mean, you don't necessarily need an elite traditional pass-catching tight end if your slot receiver, say a Marvin Mims, is operating in that newly vacated space. Payton is incredibly creative with his personnel groupings.
Sure, Payton is creative.
Right, so he can use 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, and use Mims in the slot to attack the linebackers. The gravity shifts the linebackers laterally as much as it pushes the safeties vertically.
Okay, but if you can't sustain those drives because you lack that physical middle-of-the-field presence to convert hard yardage, what happens? Your defense is on the field for 40 minutes a game. And that is where this continuity argument really starts to fall apart for me.
See, I fundamentally disagree that the defense is where this falls apart. In fact, the continuity on defense is the anchor of this entire operation. Chad Jensen over at Sports Illustrated made a phenomenal point about this. Returning nearly the entire starting defensive lineup is a massive, quantifiable advantage in a league where September football is notoriously sloppy.
It's sloppy because teams haven't played live snaps together.
Precisely. Defensive football is primarily about communication. It's about passing off crossers in zone coverage, understanding run fits, and trusting the man next to you to maintain gap integrity. By keeping that unit intact, losing only John Franklin Myers on the defensive line, the Broncos are bypassing the steep learning curve that usually plagues defenses early in the season.
They still have to execute, though.
But you have guys who already speak the same language. Let's look at Alex Singleton, for example. You can point to his athletic limitations, but what you can't measure is pre-snap alignment. You can't measure the veteran leadership he provides in getting the defensive front set, identifying the Mike linebacker, and shifting the line before the snap.
Pre-snap is great, but
He is a dependable tackler who understands the scheme intimately. You can't just plug in a free agent off the street in August and expect that level of operational competence.
I have to challenge your use of the word dependable there. How can we call a linebacker dependable when the empirical data shows he's a massive liability where it matters most in the modern NFL?
That's a bit harsh.
It's not harsh, it's just the numbers. Missing tackles in coverage is a fatal flaw for an inside linebacker. Let's look at the Pro Football Focus numbers Travis Wakeman highlighted. Singleton ranks 18th out of 98 qualifying linebackers in missed tackle rate in coverage.
PFF grades aren't everything.
He ranks 33rd out of 99 against a run. But let's dig into the why behind those numbers. As Singleton gets older, his lateral agility is rapidly depreciating. He is struggling to flip his hips and carry faster players vertically. And when he's forced to break down an open space against a shifty running back, his change of direction mechanics are completely failing him.
But look, PFF grades in isolation strip away the context of the defensive call. You have to look at the scheme. If a linebacker is put in a mismatched zone drop because of an aggressive blitz package, the resulting missed tackle in open space against a running back looks terrible on a spreadsheet.
But he's still missing the tackle.
Because that's a structural sacrifice of the defensive coordinator's scheme, not necessarily an individual failure of the player. If you ask a linebacker to cover 30 yards of grass because you brought a zero blitz, of course his missed tackle rate is going to spike.
I understand the limitations of grading systems and the context of play calling. I do, but the tape matches the data here. Think of a defense like a stretched rubber band. The defensive line is one end, the secondary is the other, and the linebackers are the middle.
Okay, I follow you.
If the defensive line doesn't get home instantly on that blitz you just mentioned, the linebackers have to stretch further and further in coverage. Singleton is the point where that rubber band snaps. In the modern NFL, offensive coordinators are entirely built around identifying linebackers who cannot cover in space, isolating them, and exploiting them relentlessly.
They'll give them safety help.
You can have all the pre-snap communication in the world, but once the ball is snapped, if your inside linebacker cannot flip his hips and carry a tight end up the seam or break down and make an open field tackle on a running back in the flat, you are dead in the water.
I really think you are underestimating the collective ability of a veteran defense to mask individual deficiencies.
Am I? Let's look at the immediate schedule. The Broncos open the regular season on Monday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult early test, no question.
It's not just a difficult test. It's a nightmare matchup designed at a laboratory to expose this specific flaw. We aren't just talking about Patrick Mahomes being good.
Obviously.
We are talking about Andy Reid utilizing 12 and 13 personnel groupings with 2 or 3 tight ends on the field to dictate the matchups. They built their dynasty on exposing aging linebackers who struggle in pass coverage. They will run mesh concepts, which force linebackers to navigate through traffic horizontally.
Every team runs mesh.
But Kansas City weaponizes it. They will run angle routes out of the backfield, specifically attacking Singleton's depreciating lateral agility by forcing him to commit to the outside before the back cuts sharply back inside. They will put him in conflict on every single down.
It's a tough matchup, yes.
Well, if Denver marches into that Monday Night Football opener with Singleton and Justin Stroud as the primary answers at inside linebacker, that defensive continuity you praised is just going to result in a continuously exploited weakness on national television. Wakeman is absolutely right. They desperately need to add a veteran option there before the season starts.
Well, I don't disagree that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes will stress test any linebacker core in the league using those exact concepts, but let's talk about the reality of how you acquire these veteran options you and Wakeman are demanding, because it brings us to a fundamental disagreement about resource management.
Okay, let's talk resources.
You can't just manifest an all-pro inside linebacker or a prime Darren Waller out of thin air. The NFL has a hard salary cap. The Broncos just executed a blockbuster trade for Jaylen Waddle, which requires a massive financial commitment and draft capital.
Right.
The front office has to prioritize. You cannot have elite players at all 22 starting positions.
Which brings us directly to the contract extensions, or rather, the concerning lack thereof.
Right. Wakeman suggests that the Broncos need to secure their young cornerbacks immediately, specifically mentioning Riley Moss and Jaquan McMillian. Now, I argue that the Broncos are exercising incredibly prudent financial management here.
Prudent?
Extremely prudent. It makes perfect sense to wait and see a strong, consistent 2026 season from a player like Riley Moss before handing him a lucrative multi-year extension. You have limited financial elasticity after the Waddle trade. Why artificially accelerate a contract window when you hold the leverage?
Because you risk alienating the player.
But if Moss takes a massive leap this year, great. You pay him then with the salary cap rising. If he regresses, You've saved yourself from a crippling salary cap disaster. That is smart, disciplined management.
It might look disciplined on a spreadsheet, but delaying extensions for proven young talent while simultaneously ignoring glaring holes at linebacker and tight end indicates a severe misalignment of front office priorities.
How is it misaligned? They're prioritizing premium positions like receiver.
Let's look at Jaquan McMillian. He didn't come in with the pedigree of a high draft pick. He joined the team as an undrafted free agent. He has fought his way up the depth chart, proved his worth in live game action, and as Wakeman rightly points out, he has already earned that new deal through his on-field production.
But from a front office perspective, he is still under team control. You don't pay for past performance. You pay for future projection.
It's not just about the technicality of team control, man. It's about locker room culture and the psychology of a defense. When you reward an undrafted player who has significantly overperformed his contract, you validate the meritocracy of your program.
Sure, it feels good.
You show every player on the practice squad that if they grind and perform, they will be taken care of. When you pinch pennies with your homegrown defensive backs, but you're willing to mortgage future assets for a splashy wide receiver from Miami, you send a very specific, potentially toxic message to your defense.
I see the psychological argument. I really do. But NFL front offices have to operate with cold, hard calculus, not sentimentality.
But practically speaking, heading into a season with unresolved contract situations for key secondary players creates immense unnecessary pressure. Training camp begins on July 22nd for rookies and July 28th for veterans. The clock is ticking loudly.
They still have time?
Barely. You want your defensive backs focused entirely on communicating those intricate zone handoffs and preparing for those Andy Reid mesh concepts. You do not want them focused on protecting their bodies because their impending free agency isn't secured.
Look, the calculus says that an elite offensive weapon like Waddle shifts the overall win probability of the franchise far more significantly than slightly overpaying an inside linebacker in July or preemptively extending a cornerback who hasn't put together a full wire-to-wire dominant campaign.
I just think it's playing with fire.
By holding their nerve, the Broncos retain flexibility. They are trusting the defensive scheme and the continuity of the coaching staff to elevate the play of guys like Singleton and McMillian.
It's a massive gamble, and it's a gamble that relies on the offense scoring 30 points a game to cover up the fact that the middle of your defense is structurally porous.
Well, let's step back and look at the totality of what we've discussed today. I firmly believe the Broncos have correctly identified the landscape of the modern NFL. They realize that combining systemic continuity, returning Bo Nix, the entire offensive line, and the vast majority of a defense that already knows how to communicate with a singular offensive force multiplier like Jaylen Waddle provides the absolute highest possible ceiling for this team.
I hear you on the ceiling.
Right, because Waddle's elite biomechanics and sheer speed create a gravitational pull that fundamentally alters opposing coverages. It forces too high shells, lightens the box, and makes everyone around him better. That gravity masks minor deficiencies elsewhere. The front office is being highly disciplined with their remaining resources, refusing to panic by aging linebackers or rush contract extensions just to appease outside analysts. That strategic discipline is exactly why they earned a B+ offseason grade and why they are positioned to outscore opponents in 2026.
I hear the argument for the offensive ceiling. I really do. But I believe this approach is fundamentally flawed because it ignores the physical realities of football in the trenches and over the middle. The structural weaknesses at inside linebacker, specifically Alex Singleton's undeniable depreciation in lateral agility and his statistical struggles in pass coverage, combined with the stark lack of a veteran presence at tight end to exploit the space Waddle creates, leave this roster with a very fragile floor.
Even with all that continuity?
On players like Jaquan McMillian to linger into training camp shows a front office distracted by the shiny new toy on offense while neglecting the foundation. A single wide receiver, especially one with a documented injury history, simply cannot reinforce a roster that is hollow in the middle. When teams like the Chiefs utilize 12 personnel to dictate matchups, that rubber band on defense is going to snap.
Well, it seems we are at a profound philosophical impasse regarding where a team's resources are best allocated in a salary cap league. But one thing we absolutely converge on is that the theoretical portion of this debate is rapidly coming to a close. The calendar is pretty unforgiving.
It really is. The rookies report on July 22nd, and the veterans right after. The talking season is basically over.
And the true test of Sean Payton's roster-building philosophy will begin in front of our eyes on July 31st with the first open practice. The ramp-up period will end, the pads will come on, and we will actually see how this theoretical offensive geometry functions against a live defense. We'll see if the linebackers can hang with the crossing routes, and we'll see if Bo Nix has the time and the spacing to utilize Waddle's gravity.
Oh, I'll be watching those linebacker coverage drills very closely, I can promise you that. I want to see how Singleton moves laterally, because everything they do in August is just a dress rehearsal for that Monday Night Football opener against Kansas City.
It really highlights the inherent tension in NFL roster construction, that delicate, agonizing balance between acquiring highly visible, blockbuster talent that changes the mathematical probability of a game and managing the invisible structural gaps that can quietly sink a season when the pressure mounts.
Exactly.
Listeners, we want you to pay close attention as the preseason unfolds. Watch how Denver's defense handles underneath routes, and watch how opposing safeties react to Jaylen Waddle. That will tell you which philosophy ultimately wins out. And again, don't forget to subscribe to NFL Nexus, leave a comment, and hit that join button.
Seriously, you really can't hide structural flaws on Monday Night Football.
No, you certainly can't. When the lights go on and Patrick Mahomes steps onto the field in primetime, we're going to find out very quickly just how much tension this roster can hold before it snaps.